After 12 days with Starfield, it's time to dive into the contrasts, the highs and lows of Bethesda's latest venture. As it turns out, the game has taken quite a few unexpected turns for me. Some of them are really good, and some not quite so much. Okay, so up front, I want to say that I've really been enjoying Starfield. The game has a lot to offer, from exploration to questing, from combat to ship and base building. It truly is a game I can get lost in for hours at a time, and like Skyrim and Fallout before it, Starfield is a game I'll be returning to again and again. It provides an experience that very few other games actually offer. Also, I think it's important to say that first and foremost, I approached this game with the full expectation of finding a Bethesda game and not a space sim. Yet that said, whilst not a full-on sim, Starfield is undoubtedly a space game, and this leads me into one of the areas that I have previously said is what I believe to be at the title's weakest, and that is spaceflight. Now, the spaceships themselves in Starfield are really good. I find this to be true both aesthetically and functionally. I've enjoyed customizing ships, upgrading them, walking around inside of them, and even flying them, and ship combat, whilst fairly basic, is also very decent. So where is the problem? Well, what makes this particular section of the game weak to me isn't really the spaceships, but rather space itself. Now, over the previous year or so, I've repeatedly pointed out that space in Starfield might be restricted. Of course, we didn't know, but it seemed likely based on what Bethesda had been saying, that space would be bounded to areas near planets. The fact this turned out to be true, whilst not entirely unexpected, is still somewhat disappointing. Now, I was hoping that even with these restricted and bounded areas of space, those environments would nevertheless be a little bit more open, with much more to discover. What I would like to have seen is the ability to travel for hundreds or even thousands of miles in any direction and make various discoveries and encounters. Sure, in reality, space is generally empty, isn't it? But it is first and foremost a video game that we're talking about here. So ultimately, having these discoveries limited to such restricted and bounded areas of space is very limiting to the game as a whole. In fact, the entire reason I mention this part at the front of the video is because it is one of the elements that really holds Starfield back from being a much better game. I'm going to come back to space exploration a bit more into the video, but first I want to move on to the other section of the video. For me then, Bethesda generally make great games. They make some really good RPGs. Although that said, I've never played Fallout 76 all that much. But Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim and Fallouts 3 and 4, however, have had thousands of hours put into them, and I've enjoyed every single one of those hours. So I went into Starfield with the expectation of more of the same. Does it deliver? Well, yes and no. It's a mix. There's certainly more positives than negatives by far. However, in some areas, Starfield is a big step back compared to the 12-year-old Skyrim. There's two reasons to my feeling for this. Firstly, Skyrim and Fallout offer huge game worlds. Sure, the maps for these games may be smaller than other open-world RPG games. However, they are densely packed with all manner of things that very much make them feel alive. From the first moments of leaving the Vault 111 and witnessing the massive open worlds in Fallout 4, to roaming the countryside in Skyrim and venturing between Solitude and Whiterun, every part of those game worlds feels connected and alive. Sure, there might be some loading screens when entering cities, caves or buildings, but the interconnectedness of the world is very much present. And these worlds feel cohesive because of that. Starfield, on the other hand, though, feels bounded in more ways than just one. The cities of Neon and New Atlantis are truly amazing. I've really enjoyed walking around them, and they've been a pleasure to experience. Aquila, meanwhile, is great too in its own way, but very different to those others. And so too are the many settlements and outposts that can be found throughout the galaxy. Yet, unfortunately, so many of those locations feel isolated and bounded. Now, the loading screens are a large part of that. They make these areas feel like instances and self-contained. Yet, somehow, I feel there's far more to this sense of isolation than just that. In short, when it comes to Skyrim and Fallout, this way the world felt alive wasn't just to do with the world's map, there was other tech going on as well. So most notable of all the many things that made this possible was the game's Radiant AI. This tech enabled NPCs to have their own lives. Store owners, for example, would work set hours, then close shop, go home and have dinner and then go to sleep. Sometimes I'd watch them during their life and see how they would have encounters and conversations with other NPCs. Sure, these conversations were generic, sometimes dull, and occasionally downright weird. That's why we've got so many memes about that sort of thing out there. But the fact that the NPCs had their own life added so much to these game worlds. It's something that makes Bethesda RPGs really stand out from the crowd. And this was just something that, it wasn't just limited to shop owners, was it? But almost all NPCs in the game. Some of them would wander from towns to wilderness, others from town to town, and this type of thing just adds so much life to the games. Starfield, on the other hand, is a massive step backwards, and I don't really understand why. While some NPCs in Starfield seem to do have life patterns and keep to timetables of sorts, the vast majority certainly do not. Store owners and office workers sit at their desks 24/7. They don't move, they don't change, they don't do anything. Towns and cities are busy regardless of the time of day, and whilst there may be some changes to crowd density, it really isn't that significant. In short then, the NPCs in Starfield are background clutter rather than background characters, and this really does make a massive difference to the game overall. Whilst to some people this might not make that much difference, to me it is a huge blow to the game, and it really does reduce the immersiveness that would otherwise be there. Personally then, I feel that this, combined with all the areas of the game feeling bounded and instanced, makes Starfield feel far less alive than, say, Skyrim, for example. Okay, so I talked about the limitations I found in Starfield first, because they really do help frame the parts that I have enjoyed. Despite those limits the game has, none of them have prevented me from enjoying the game. I do still feel that Starfield is a good game. Whilst the space travel is certainly the weakest part of the game, it still contains enough to add a lot of value to Starfield. Like I said, the spaceships are a significant part of the game, and whilst it's true to say that their use is optional in many ways, largely thanks to fast travel, for those who want to make the most of them, spaceships are a huge part of Starfield. The space encounters, ship-to-ship combat, shipboarding, zero-G, first-person combat, looting and other activities have all been engaging, and I've spent hours at a time doing all of these things. But the two things I've enjoyed the most in Starfield, however, are the side quests and the planetary exploration. So regarding quests, long-term viewers of this channel will be aware that I've said numerous times in the past that I find the main quests in Bethesda RPGs to be uninspiring and poorly written. That's also true of Starfield. It was true of Skyrim and Oblivion and all their other games. The writing in the main quest for Starfield I do feel is dull, and the dialogue options that the player has feel extremely dull as well. In fact, I've played through the main quest about 3/4 of the way through and eventually decided to stop. I just couldn't take it anymore. And I've little interest in working my way through that to get to New Game Plus, or indeed any other part of the story. The side quests, however, I found to be very strong and also a lot of fun. The Mantis quest, for example, I came across unexpectedly without really being aware of what I was getting into. The Crimson Fleet quest has also been great, as have many of the other side quests. Also, there are numerous random quests that have sent me into some seriously impressive locations throughout the game. Some of these side quests have been very simple, such as fetch or delivery missions. Others have had a lot more depth and been set within great environments. All of this then has really made the game feel very much alive. And despite what I've said about the lack of Radiant AI in Starfield, or the reduction of it, the fact that there are so many side quests and encounters all throughout the game and throughout the settled systems really does help bring Starfield to life for me. The other part of the game I've been really enjoying is landing on planets and then setting out to see what I can discover. And for some reason, it seems that a bunch of people out there don't really enjoy the barren planets, and yeah, 90% of the planets in Starfield are barren. But personally, I've found that they make me more than happy to roam their surfaces. All of the planets have various locations on them. Sometimes this is a simple planetary trait to find. Other times it can be a large base or even a cave. All of them have been worth exploring, and sure, sooner or later these become repetitive with similar or even these exact same layouts, but for me that's really not a problem. The planets with flora and fauna, meanwhile, have been even more interesting to roam and explore. Now, ironically, whilst the NPCs found at outposts, bases and other places of course don't have too much in the way of sensible AI, their very presence really does add depth to the world. For more of my thoughts on exploration, do check out my video on what is it like to explore in Starfield. I'll make sure to link that in the video description. I don't want to talk too much more about exploration at this point because I've done it before, but do be aware that it is, for me, a very important part of the game. Now, as with any game, there's been some unexpected things with Starfield. Most of these have been good surprises, actually. One thing that continues to surprise me is the sheer scale of some of the outposts, bases and space stations, and even spaceships that I've visited. Some of these underground complexes, for example, are truly impressive. There was one there that felt like a bit of a silo, sort of an underground military abandoned complex, which had this big silo that opened up to allow spaceships to land inside of them. Another surprise is that some of the quests have been surprisingly good. The Mantis one that I mentioned before is a great example of this. I think that perhaps the biggest surprise for me, however, is the ease with which Starfield allows you to move from one activity to another, whether that's following your current quests, exploring space or planets, or even building a new ship. Switching between activities is a breeze, and it can all be done without any unnecessary time sinks, and for me that is a really big deal. Because one of the biggest turn-offs for me in any game is time wasting, and yes, this includes my pet peeve, long distance space travel, or having to search for something in unknown or random locations, so I'm really glad that this doesn't exist in Starfield. When it comes to gameplay, Starfield is a known quantity. Once you get to grips with the game, what it offers is very clear. It's easy to achieve the goals you set yourselves, and that to me is very important. Starfield then, in many ways, is a classic Bethesda RPG, and that is ironically what has held it back, its large scope. Whilst previous Bethesda RPGs have been much smaller, they've all felt more alive, and this is a thing that very much 100% holds Starfield back in my eyes from being a truly great game. Nonetheless, it is a game that I've greatly enjoyed, and will no doubt continue to enjoy for much longer to come. Do let me know what you think about Starfield in the comments section below, because obviously all of our experience for the game is unique. We'll all be seeing things in a very different way. Some people have been viewing it as a true space game like No Man's Sky, or a space sim like Elite Dangerous. Meanwhile, my approach has been to view it as a space-based RPG. So let me know what you think about all of this in the comments section below. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.